Alright, I'm sick of serious video games, like Bioshock Infinite, where the entire game is essentially just shooting people in the face to get to the next cutscene. So this is my idea. Any images or story details are only for painting a picture. Let's start with something simple. Instead of an escort mission, we'll have a stalking mission. The gameplay will revolve around staying close to a target. So for instance, here is the player, here is the target. If the player gets too close to the target, the mission fails. However, if the player strays too far, the mission also fails. Now this could be realized in that maybe the target is going to a secret location and the player must infiltrate that location. So if the player is too close, the target grows suspicious and runs away. Likewise, if the player loses sight of the target, he or she will not find that secret location. A futuristic setting would be ideal since there is more to play around with. Also, this is going to be in first-person perspective. The mission will start off on a moving train. The player is given a photo of the target, and it is the player's job to then move around the train trying to find that person. The player sees the girl through a door window in the next compartment. The train eventually comes to a stop and all outside doors open. However, the player's compartment door is blocked by people trying to get out, and the girl has already left. So the player must now look through different windows trying to find where she goes. Finally, the door is clear and the two races begin. So rather than simply highlighting the target with a yellow glow or something stupid, we force the player to think on their feet and already add gameplay without really adding anything at all. The player is forced to move around and pick out women from the men on the train, then trying to find one with red hair. Maybe she is in the way back or right by the locked door. Maybe she constantly shifts her position or has a different haircut than the photo given. A simple button press would take out a handheld device and it would show how far away, by meters, the target is. Taking out this device slightly slows down the player's movement. Once the player is caught up to the target, just staying between the two radiuses would be easy. That's why we need to add in more variables. Let's say the player is a wanted fugitive, and if seen by the cops, the mission fails. So, what if the target goes down an alleyway where the cop is? Now, you could set up a situation where you have two alternate paths, where there are no cops, but only one is the right way to back up with the girl. One path goes to the right, one path goes to the left. If the player takes the wrong path, the girl gets too far away and the mission fails. To know which is the right path, the player could take out the handheld device and essentially play hot or cold to gauge which is the right path, since one path will escalate the rate and how far away the target is. Another scenario could have the player come out of the path in front of the girl instead of behind her. So now the player needs to juggle, looking out for cops ahead and turning around to see if the girl takes a turn, all while staying close. Maybe the girl walks at an erratic pace or even runs to beat a crosswalk countdown. Anything to keep the player on his or her toes. For example, I use the game tag. If you're playing tag and you're it, your goal is to tag the next person. And if you do tag that person, you now run away from the person who is it. Essentially, it's the same thing, but the two roles have completely different feels to them. And since moving the player ahead of the target, this does that. Okay, so part 2 is basically going to be, once the target gets to the secret location, you could have a game save. And the next challenge would be to get inside that building or complex. The target enters a code in the door and goes inside. Maybe an earpiece lets the player know what to do. For example, you're going to need to use your binoculars to see the code she enters. And then the player has to find a good line of sight from a distance while the target slowly enters the code and goes inside. So with no windows to look through and see where the target is, the player takes out that handheld device which gauges how far away the target is. Let's say that a girl enters the building and stays right inside the entryway, taking off her shoes. So if the player enters too soon, the mission fails. She's right there. The target proceeds to move away in a different room and lets the player enter the code and move inside. Now, the gameplay here is simply not being seen or heard from the target. There are no more radiuses. Maybe the reason you need to get inside this location is to find important data that's inside. Walking slowly makes no noise, so the player needs to constantly hold out the device and maneuver smartly as the target moves around her apartment. The player may crouch behind furniture or simply move to a different room to avoid sight. Maybe an audio clue could add some variation, like, what if the house phone rings? The player sure as hell better stay away from that phone. Maybe the girl walks over, picks up the phone and says, "Hold on, I need to go to the bathroom, I will call you back." So now the player knows the target will head to the bathroom and return to call that person. This gives the player time to find that important data. Once the girl comes back and is on her phone, the player will have access to the other parts of the apartment, since she is staying in the room with the phone. So listening to this conversation that she has would be key, as judging by the tone of the voice, or simply hearing, "I have to go, I will talk to you later," would mean the player better find a place to hide. Maybe during this conversation she talks about important data, or talks about the important data, and gives clues to where it might be. Once the girl hangs up the phone, she mentions to herself she is going to sleep. Once she comes out of the bathroom and gets in bed, she turns on an alarm system which has a countdown till activation. Maybe it's 5 minutes. So the player needs to find the data, grab it, and leave before the 5 minutes are up. Doing so completes the mission. Mission success. This indoor scenario has dodging gameplay, forces the player to think on their feet, and they also need to listen to audio clues and find data, all within a 10-minute or so span. And that's it. There's no shooting, no throwing rocks to distract cops, no stealth takedowns. It's just simple, realistic gameplay that constantly changes. Maybe during this mission the girl talks to people on the street. Maybe while on the phone in her apartment she spills out information that your partner is actually working for her organization. Or maybe she stops at a coffee joint and your earpiece, your supervisor tells you something important. All these could add plot seamlessly, while other games have non-stop shooting, and then finally you get to the cutscene area, where all you do is walk around listening to NPCs talk to each other. And then you proceed to shoot people in the face to get to the next cutscene. Nothing's important in terms of gameplay in those conversations. Now, I'm not saying games right now don't have these elements that I've been talking about, but they are so basic and force-feed the player. And none of them really change gameplay besides maybe giving you 2 guns to shoot instead of 1, or a turret sequence, or a driving bit, or some puzzle that is completely unrealistic and is only there for a break from all the shooting. I'm also not saying that shooting or driving or turret or puzzle or whatever are bad. You could implement those things in mind as well, but do it smartly. So that said, you could add hundreds of little things to make my idea better, and that's the point. It's just a template. But what if a game did that for its entire campaign? Always change the gameplay. That would be something.